Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. So I've been playing the Neverwinters, and one of the more interesting things, at least for me, is figuring out how to optimize your character. What we learned from a suggestion from my stream chat, someone suggested that there are some kind of diminishing returns at certain values for some of these stats. So when one stat, may seem like it's the absolute best one to stack on any particular class, this may or may not be the case at the higher ranges of each of the ratings. So I'm just going to go over kind of some of the stuff that we researched, some of the results, and the decisions that I made with my character, so you can see kind of the interpretation that I make from the results for my own character. Maybe you can take that and use it on your own as well. So mostly what we're talking about is stuff like this. So sometimes you have a ring with 3 damage stats: power, crit, recovery. Those are all damage increasing stats, but there's also like armor pen. So you can see that it has armor pen, and pretty much those are really the big important stats for the offensive class. So these are the stats that we study. So recovery, you can kind of see what it does: recharge, speed increase, action point gain. As you can tell based on how much I have, I really like recovery on my wizard. Armor pen is mitigation reduction. I think it's pretty much cut down from the defense, and it can go in the negative values. So if I have 13.9% defense and someone penetrates through abilities and gear and all that stuff 100% of my armor, I'll probably be around negative 90 or so. And the reason I say probably is because there's no way to check, but based on the rough damage numbers that we've seen, it seems like it works that way. Crit chance just increases your crit on top of what you have from your base stats, talents, and starting point. And power just increases your weapon by a flat amount. So you can see that my weapon does 641 to 784 damage, which is like, I don't know, let's just say 720 or so, something like that, average damage. It increases it by 142.2. So power seems to be more effective on classes that use crappier weapons. So we think rogues have better scaling from power. But something to note is that on top of potentially rogues having better scaling from power than others, the wizards have base damage on their spells. So if you have no weapon on and you have no power, your spells still do damage. And they're further increased by a coefficient on your total weapon damage, which includes your power. So there's a lot of diminishing from the power bonus on a caster than compared to like a rogue. So that's pretty much the rough side of things. Now I want to show you guys the more interesting stuff that we've learned. So over here I have my neat little spreadsheet. Pretty much it's a little bit difficult to interpret, but I'll help you guys out here. Basically, recovery, we noticed that it tends to diminish quite rapidly around the 3,000 mark. To interpret the data, just so you guys know what's going on here, these are values that we took from the tooltip in-game. They're consistent across all the characters, and we took the value, the percentage, so the effectiveness of that value, and the slope reaching that point from the last. So for instance, in the top bracket, the 4,896 recovery gives 27.7% action point gain and recharge increase, or whatever it is for the abilities. And the 465 means leading up to this point, it took 465 recovery for 1%. So it's kind of like the rate leading up to that point, not from that point on. So with that known, you can kind of see that at the beginning it takes about 100 recovery to get 1%, and then when you hit about maybe 1,500 or so, it goes to 120, 126, 141, 150. These are going to be skewed because there's only one decimal in the tooltip, and so there's a lot of like rounding issues. But pretty much what you can tell is that recovery is pretty good up until about the 27 to 2,900 mark, where it starts to surpass 200, and about 3,000 it goes up a lot. It takes a lot more recovery to get 1%. So going over 3,000 seems like a pretty bad idea. And as far as crit goes, crit kind of models recovery in a way that if you had crit, it's as if you had recovery, but it would be 1,000. So what that means is if you had like 1,000 crit, the diminishing would be equal to about 2,000 recovery. If you had 2,000 crit, the diminishing would be roughly equal to 3,000 recovery. So it diminishes about 1,000 earlier than recovery. So as such, crit, especially if your class doesn't use it for any ulterior bonus, is also not very good, at least compared to recovery if your class depends on cooldowns. So that's pretty good to know. And then armor pen, we had to buy a lot of gear to make armor pen work, but we got the data. Armor pen is actually more efficient than anything when it comes to points invested in armor pen per percentage reward. As you can tell, it takes only 80 armor pen to give you 1% mitigation reduction, and it goes up fairly steeply, but up until roughly 1,500, it's really, really good. And up until about 2,000, it's still quite good. The thing to note with armor pen is that, if a boss has existing armor when you attack it, if it has like 50% reduction, if you have 20 armor pen, it's going to do a lot of percentage damage bonus increase. But if you're in a full party, you probably have a lot of people doing mitigation debuffs during that time. And as such, the boss might already have minus 100% of his mitigation. So he might be at minus 100%. So penetrating 20% will only give you a 10% increase. So armor pen in a group setting actually diminishes itself. So that's a very important thing to know. And power increases by a flat amount. There's no diminishing. There's just diminishing from having way too much of one stat when it stacks to itself as a percentage. But let's not get into that, because that pretty much applies to everything. So power is essentially flat. And I just made a chart there so you can see how it increases. And roughly, if you have, let's say, 5,000 power as opposed to 0 power, you would do 26% more weapon damage. And again, if you have spells, this may not be 26% more damage. It might be like 20% more damage because you already have a base. So that's kind of the information there. You guys can screenshot that. I can't give you guys a link to the spreadsheet because it's not really fancied up. If we fancy it up, maybe I'll make another guide about the really details of it, but I don't know. For now, maybe you guys can interpret my conclusions. So when it comes to playing a wizard in PvE, doing damage is kind of cool, like you get higher on the damage meters and all that, but let's be realistic. The best part of Neverwinter, the most fun part of Neverwinter, and the role of the wizard is to push monsters off ledges. It is literally the best out of anything. You don't kill the monsters. You can push as many as you want. You use your ability that vacuums up the monsters into the air, and then you use your shield burst to push them all off. Neither ability has a target cap, so you can literally pull the whole instance and knock it all off the ledge in one cast if you time it properly. As such, your damage is strictly based off of cooldowns. That means recovery, for as diminished as it gets, for as crappy as it gets per point later on, can't be matched, at least in my opinion. So that's why on my wizard, I go full recovery. I don't even bother with the other stuff. I mean, yeah, if it's single target, I'll do a little bit more damage if I didn't have so much recovery and got some crit or some armor pen, but who cares, My build is based around doing AoE damage largely through knocking monsters off cliffs and by buffing my allies with a slotted steal time, which gives my allies combat advantage, and recovery gives them combat advantage more often. So all my recovery increases the group's damage further and increases my ability to knock monsters off cliffs. So that's pretty much why I largely ignored all the other stats. And even though, sometimes it's not really possible because, when you get a piece of gear, it doesn't have full recovery. It has like crit, or it has armor pen, or, it has some other stuff as well most of the time. Out of those stats, I think that power is the second best for wizard, just because crit diminishes very, very quickly, very, very early. On top of that, as a wizard, you're probably using Eye of the Storm, and Eye of the Storm gives you a 100% chance to crit when it procs. So, when it procs, your crit is completely useless, the one that you have on your gear. Armor pen, also, if you're playing in a group, and if you're playing a wizard in PvE, you're playing in a group, is significantly diminished by the fact that everyone in your group has, abilities, has procs, has a bunch of just random stuff that reduces the mitigation of the monsters. So as such, armor pen is just diminishing itself at that point. All in all, crit sucks, armor pen sucks, power sucks, recovery is alright. All the stats are not very impressive, so you just kind of have to choose between them. I put the numbers at the bottom there. Recovery from 2500 to 3100 is, a point where it's pretty good. Up until then, it's not bad. After that, it diminishes a lot. Crit diminishes really, really fast, so unless you're like a rogue that has huge bonuses from crit, you don't really want to look into it. And armor pen, if you're playing solo, if you're playing PvP, it's quite good, especially up to about 1500. That's why I wrote the number in there. Maybe give you guys some guidelines, and to those that don't really care at all about the game, maybe you guys can, appreciate the thought of, finding this stuff out, going into the details, because, this is typical stuff. We do this in pretty much any game, looking at some of the statistics and figuring out how it's optimized. It's really important to learn this stuff if you want to optimize your character and figure it out by yourself, because this kind of information just didn't exist. We try to look this stuff up, impossible. Got to get the data, got to figure it out yourself, and hopefully maybe made it a little bit easier for you guys to do so. So hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you guys tomorrow.